For the first time, a camera captures a teen girl accused of orchestrating the murder of her boyfriend. This video per WPDE television. Gianna Kistenmacher is one of 9 teens charged in the murder of Trey Wright, who is 16 years old. For the first time, we're hearing what Gianna's side of the story may be, why she cried in court as her attorney made some shocking requests, including to lift her ban on social media. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. The people closest to Trey Wright have told us that he was someone who was full of life. He was life of the party, and he was also just a great friend. And that's what makes this story so heartbreaking, is the alleged betrayal that took place the night of his murder. And this is the girl who's accused of being at the center of that alleged betrayal, according to law enforcement in South Carolina. This video per WPDE television of Gianna Kistenmacher making a court appearance. She is now 18 years old, and she is charged with murder. Now, deputies say that she was not the one who allegedly fired the shots that killed Trey Wright, but she allegedly helped orchestrate the meetup with the person who did. Law enforcement alleged that she knew what was going to happen. For the first time, a camera caught Kistenmacher in court since her arrest in June of last year. Now, before we get to the requests that her attorney made in court, including asking the judge to allow her to use social media and some of the new details we have on the case that we heard in the courtroom, I want to back up for a second and just break down what we know to this point about a tragic and chaotic night when 16-year-old Trey Wright lost his life, and why a total of 9 teenagers are all facing the charge of murder in this story. So let's go back to June 24th, and that's when a call came in around 11:30 at night to the Florence County Sheriff's Office in South Carolina. Deputies needed to respond to a shooting, and they needed to get there fast. When they arrived, they found 16-year-old Trey Wright. He was fighting for his life. He had been shot.
As soon as I came out the doors, he was already lying in the middle of the road. My dad was over top of him. He wasn't really performing CPR because he had seen that Trey got shot kind of where his lungs were.
That's one of Trey's closest friends. He actually lived with her family for a period of time. And she told me that she and her dad were trying to save Trey when deputies arrived.
In that moment, all I could do was just go to Trey's side. He was gurgling and mumbling like he was trying to talk, but I had to kind of tell him that he was okay and everything was going to be okay, that he didn't need to try and say anything. He just needed to try and breathe and stay awake for us.
Trey was rushed to the hospital, and that's where he was pronounced dead. Court records describe what was a chaotic scene on the night Trey died. People crying and screaming, a young boy losing his life. Detectives in this case, they've cast a wide net. And right now, 9 teens are facing charges. And not just any charges, they're all facing the charge of murder, including the youngest suspects who are 15 and 16 years old. 2 of the 9, have not been named publicly because they're still juveniles in the court system. But again, all of them are facing that top charge of murder. This is the one who authorities say pulled the trigger. His name is Devin Raper, and at the time of this recording, he is the only one still being held without bond in jail. Raper and Wright followed each other on social media, and that close family friend told us that they were much more than just social media pals. They were friends in real life, which is just so incredibly heartbreaking. They were new friends. They would go to truck shows in Myrtle Beach. They didn't know each other for a long time, but they did hang out. Detectives say the night of Trey's murder, the 2 of them were at odds. And they were at odds over a girl. And that girl is the one who we just talked about making her court appearance. The girl who is charged with murder in this case. She is accused of orchestrating what happened to Trey Wright. Her name, Gianna Kistenmacher. Trey's friend told me that Gianna actually remained on scene that night after Trey was shot and deputies arrived. But she did tell me that she found something suspicious about how Gianna was allegedly acting on scene. Had you ever met Gianna?
That night was the first time I'd ever met her.
And again, I know there's things that you can say and you can't say. I mean, but she was still on scene. I guess like you saw her there when you went outside.
Yes, sir. She was still on scene. She stayed on scene till he went to the hospital, and then she went to the hospital. But his mom and them didn't know anything till I got there, or the other kids got there to let her know what was going on, because I wasn't the person who could tell her that on the phone, and I was the one who called.
In a moment, I'm going to play for you what Gianna's attorney told a courtroom about how she acted that night, what she allegedly did that night, the night that Trey was killed. Someone who was actually in a relationship with Trey Wright. Now, the police report that we have on this case, it's 10 pages long, and it does give us some good details about what deputies saw when they came on scene that night in Johnsonville, South Carolina. It was around 11:41 that law enforcement show up to this shooting. It was a chaotic scene. You had these people who are crying. I mean, you think of all these young teenagers who are now facing a charge of murder in this case, but also allegedly witnessed someone being shot and someone dying on scene. Trey was on the ground. Several people were around him, according to law enforcement. He had 2 close gunshot wounds to his chest. He was rushed to the hospital, and that's where he lost his life. Deputies say that they were told the shooter fled in a white Mazda SUV. 4 people were inside that car, and one of them had a gun and was wearing a ski mask. Deputies say when the car first arrived, Trey Wright approached it. He banged on the door, someone opened it, and shots were fired. The deputy also writes in the report that the confrontation was planned and it was fueled by provocative Snapchat messages. Law enforcement also say there are recordings of the incident on some of the suspects' phones. Those haven't been made public. Now, these are the 7 teenagers who we know about who are facing murder charges in this case. Each of them facing that same charge that Devin Raper is facing, even though law enforcement say he's the one who pulled the trigger on Trey Wright. I also want to point out for you, this is what happened when Raper faced a judge for the first time last year.
I did not do none of this. There was 4 more people.
All right, I'm not here to try.
I understand that.
I'm not here to try your case, but you can speak to law enforcement and you can also talk to your attorney.
They won't talk. They didn't do nothing.
That was Raper at his first court appearance where he tried to argue his case to the judge. This video per WBTW. Now, these charges, it's a unique situation to say the least. South Carolina has a statute that's called hand of one, hand of all. And it means that an accomplice is just as guilty as the shooter. And it appears that's what prosecutors are going for in this case. They have said that they are pushing for the youngest suspects to be tried for adults as well. So those 2 people in the juvenile court system, prosecutors want to see them tried just like everyone else in this case. Now, murder is perhaps the most serious charge that we have as a society, right? And facing a murder charge, so many of us, if we were even rumored to be facing that possibility, it would be emotionally crushing. You would think. But then I want to show you what these 2 allegedly did on social media. These are suspects, 17-year-old Braylon Thompson and 17-year-old Jaden O'Clair, both now out on bond. They were granted $20,000 bonds. Court records show they bonded out the same day. We found this picture of a Snapchat post that was made by Thompson of him and O'Clair outside the Florence County Detention Center. It shows the 2 of them posing. You see O'Clair throwing up a peace sign, Thompson with his finger in his mouth showing off his teeth like he's got a grill in. The caption, "I'm free," with a racial slur. And I'm not going to say it, but it begins with the letter N. I reached out to the Florence County Sheriff to see if they were aware of this post, and they told me that they were aware. Now, the other suspects facing charges, 18-year-old Hunter Kendall, 17-year-old Sydney Kearns, and 18-year-old Corinne Belviso. Detectives say they brought Raper to the scene allegedly, and they allegedly knew that night that he was armed. And they knew, allegedly, that there was going to be a violent confrontation with the victim. All of the suspects but Raper were granted bond in this case, and they are out as this case is moving forward. And that includes for Kistenmacher, who made a recent court appearance in South Carolina. This is video per WPDE television. Now, you remember what Trey's friend told us about the night of his murder and how she allegedly felt Kistenmacher was acting on scene. Here's what Kistenmacher's attorney said in court.
She tried to drive to the hospital to be with him. Her car had a flat tire. She actually rode with the aunt, I believe, of the victim to the hospital where she remained. Her parents met her there until they received news that the victim had passed away.
Kistenmacher was in court because her attorney wanted her bond conditions loosened. She's been on house arrest with GPS monitoring since she posted bond on July 28th. Her attorney claims that she's followed all of her bond conditions perfectly. And the only times that she's had to leave her house is to go to doctor's visits or when she goes to meet with her attorney. She's also been accompanied by her parents on those visits. Now, according to WPDE, the attorney went on to say during this court hearing, quote, "The GPS monitoring is very expensive. What she desires to do is to be able to leave home for the purpose of work, to help contribute to the cost of her record of representation in litigation. She has no access, has not had the access where she violated this condition. She has no access to social media. She is asking how she has access without the ability to post. That's a part of our request today. But essentially, based on those factors, she has not violated the bond. She is fully cooperating with the state, including the proffer agreement that she has no prior criminal record. She is no risk of flight. She is not a substantial danger to the community, and she does wish to contribute to the cause of her representation in litigation. I'm asking to remove the house arrest. I'm asking the court to remove GPS monitoring and to remove no access to social media, prohibiting her from posting. Under the circumstances, she will continue to cooperate as her stated intention." Now, this is how the prosecutor responded to that. He said, quote, "These individuals have traveled from Horry County to Johnsonville, knew without a doubt they were traveling there for some sort of violent confrontation. There's no escaping that. There are differing opinions inside both those vehicles, whether at the time that they arrived, that they knew the shooter was in possession of a gun. However, they knew he was in possession of the gun just before leaving. They saw him firing a gun at one location, and then there was an altercation that was captured on video. Judge, on cell phone video that shows they placed the Johnsonville group, including the victim, in the case on FaceTime, and the shooter actually produced a gun and holds it at the camera and says, 'I'll come down there and I'll kill you.' So they knew there would be a violent altercation. They should have known that it might have led to more, and it certainly did. Now, her defense attorney is absolutely right that she has been fully cooperative. She continues to cooperate with the state, and her cooperation is important in this case. After hearing from a representative from the victim's family, I will leave this court's discretion as to modifying the conditions of the bond. However, I will be vehemently opposed to lifting that social media ban. I think we can all agree that that's kind of the reason all of this transpired in the first place. There's an argument in social media, and we all see that time and time again. So I would be bitterly opposed to the social media portion of the bond conditions. I'd like for that ban to stay in place." End quote. After hearing the arguments, the judge decided to lift Kistenmacher's house arrest condition to allow her to go to work, but she does have to be home between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. And she is also only allowed to leave to go to those doctor's appointments or to meet with her attorney. Joining us now to talk about this case, once again, is Tyler Bailey, criminal defense attorney, civil rights attorney. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. And there's a lot of layers to this story when we talk about Trey Wright and what police say happened to him back in June of last year. But this was really the first time for the girl who was at the center of this case, who's accused of kind of orchestrating everything. She appears in court and she wants her bond conditions changed. And the first thing I want to ask you about is the social media part of it. Because when you look at this case, and this is what prosecutors said, like kind of at the crux of it was an issue on social media, and yet she's asking to get back on social media. What did you make of that request?
This entire case has been a different one with the amount of kids who are being charged with murder. And it appears that the prosecutor and the court, they're looking at new tools to address the problems that we're having today with youth violence. So social media was a big part in this case. And that's why it was a bond condition. And we also talked earlier about how it's not normal for accessories before the fact they actually be charged with murder in situations like this. And it appears that the prosecutors are trying to get to the root cause of a lot of the issues in this case, and social media being one of them. That's why it was a bond condition that they wanted.
And for the defense, though, to say, because this is someone who's facing a murder charge, and I know we'll talk about kind of how things work in South Carolina, where she's not the one who pulled the trigger, but they allege that she's the one who brought the person who did pull the trigger to have this altercation that they allege that she knew was going to be violent. And I could see someone on the outside say it's not a great look for someone facing that charge to be like, well, I'd like to get on Facebook or Instagram or whatever it may be. What's typically the calculation there when you're asking for bond conditions to change, where, how much do you value maybe the public looking at it and being like, I don't know if social media is something that you should get back on?
I think this may be one of those situations where the defense lawyer and the client may have had a difference. This is a young person who likes to be on social media. It probably was a big part of her life, as it is a part of countless people's lives across the world at this point. And it's not the best look because it makes you look essentially spoiled, like you're asking for a luxury and somebody lost their life. But here, the defense lawyer asked that her client be allowed to get back on social media. I probably wouldn't have wanted to ask that, but at the end of the day, lawyers have to zealously represent their clients, and the client, she may have really wanted to get on this. Unless she's trying to make some money to pay her legal fees and for GPS monitoring off of social media. That's the only other legitimate reason I could see for her need to be on it. But there's nothing in the record that shows she has a history of making money from her social media handles.
And for people who are just kind of getting started in understanding this case that's been going on since last year, and you have these 9 teenagers, we know 7 of their names, 2 of them, believe are still in the juvenile court system, but they're all charged with murder. They're all facing the same charge as Devin Raper, who's the one who's accused of firing the shots that killed Trey Wright. What is the statute, when you explain in South Carolina, of how this works, where someone who may have been aware that an altercation could occur could actually be facing the same charge as the person who fired the shots that killed the victim in this story?
Generally, in South Carolina, we have a theory called the hands of one is the hands of all. So one person who is actually the trigger person here, but the associates, friends who assisted him in getting there, whether providing transportation, location, they could all be charged with the same crime as the actual perpetrator. It's often seen in cases like gun possession, if a gun is in the vehicle, or drugs and being in the vehicle. It's not often that's used in a situation like a murder in this case, but the prosecutors here charge most of the teenagers involved with murder, actually the same as the perpetrator. And it seems to be that they're trying to get ahead of some of the problems that we're seeing with youth violence, gun crime amongst younger people. And then you got the social media aspect of it between some of the FaceTime videos, social media contact. And it looks like kids not taking these things seriously, but you have somebody who lost their life, and the court showing everybody involved that this is serious and needs to stop.
When someone applies, like in this case, a prosecutor using a particular statute where it's typically not used, but you can maybe see where they're going for in this, what are some of the challenges that a lawyer could face in getting a jury to kind of come on board with that and to see things the way that they're seeing it, of saying, well, they all knew that there was this beef going on between Trey Wright and Devin Raper, and they knew that if they brought Devin to the party, that allegedly something was going to go down that was going to be violent, and that's exactly what happened.
Prosecutors, like defense lawyers, they have to maintain their credibility before the court and jury, the jurors in this case, and it could be a problem with the jurors believing this is prosecutorial overreach, that they're extending the bounds of the law here, and it should not be applied to all of the individuals, teenagers here, because it's kind of hard to say that they knew that he was going to commit the murder. A young person, he did have a gun, so what the prosecution would say, what did you think was going to happen? But there's nothing to show that these kids or young teenagers knew exactly what they were going to do, and if he had a history of being involved in shooting. So it's a stretch, but they could be found guilty. More importantly, it looks like the prosecution is using it for leverage. You see the young lady here, she's entered into a proffer agreement, which she's essentially means she's cooperating with the government to some extent. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the others enter into proffer agreements and they're charged with accessory before the fact, and the murder charges are ultimately dismissed by the prosecution.
Right, because when someone says a proffer agreement, and that's what the attorney said in open court, that she is following with it, is that meaning, you have all of these people that were allegedly witnesses to what happened to Trey Wright, that she could, pretty much helping law enforcement understand what happened and build a case and potentially testify down the road?
That's 100% correct. You're sitting down with law enforcement. You essentially are waiving your Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. You're talking to the prosecutors, law enforcement about your involvement, what you know. You have to be completely honest and forthcoming with the prosecution. They take that information and they can use it against you or others. But for part of the proffer agreement, if you ultimately cooperate, they could decide not to prosecute you. They could lower the charges, and they could use that information to prosecute others.
And when you look at this case, because you have one person, and as much as the law says, you're just as guilty as the person who pulled the trigger, he is still being held without bond. She and the 7 others are all out on bond. And like for her, she's able to go to work. She's able to go to doctor's appointments. She can meet with her lawyer. She has her freedom to an extent compared to waiting out a trial in the county jail, where it still seems like the others that are charged with murder but aren't the ones who fired the shots, that they're not really being treated the same way as when you typically think of what a murder suspect goes through in the pretrial process.
Yeah, the court can recognize and distinguish the difference between the accessories versus the perpetrator. So that's why they were able to get bond. They have different conditions of their bond. You see here, even the ask about being on social media shows, and the court was inclined to hear it, but ultimately ruled against it, that the court can tell the difference, just like jurors will be able to tell the difference between the actual shooter and somebody who participated in a lower capacity. So although the prosecution has charged them all, the record is showing that the decision makers, right now the only decision maker is the judge regarding things like bond. They can tell the difference between a person who may have a lower culpability and responsibility in what happened versus somebody who's the actual trigger person in this situation, who's still sitting in jail with bond being denied.
According to the law enforcement documents we have, at the center of this case are these social media messages, and really the center of this case, according to law enforcement, is Gianna Kistenmacher, because she was the one who was between Trey Wright and Devin Raper, and then there's this these social media messages that were sent back and forth, and then she is being accused of kind of being the person that orchestrated this meetup that then ends in Trey Wright's murder. For if she, cooperating with the government, is there a way that she walks out of this without having any sort of a punishment whatsoever if that murder charge is dropped? Where if she cooperates and gives everything, what is the expectation typically in one of these agreements of what she gets in return?
I don't think there's going to be any situation where all charges are dismissed and she walks away as if nothing happened. If that was the case, it really would set bad precedent for what this prosecutor's office has done by charging them all with murder, simply to dismiss serious allegations against the young lady here and the others who may be involved. I do see there's possibly a situation, given their young age, if the murder charges are dismissed, if they're charged with being accessory, before the fact and providing assistance to Draper, who ultimately did the shooting here, then they could possibly get probation. You can get credit for time served with the time that she's been on GPS monitoring, on house arrest. There's some creative things that defense lawyers in the court and prosecution could come up that she has some sort of punishment, but it's not to the extent of murder. And still, there still is no telling. Who knows? You can get a judge who's not inclined to hear anything like that, and he actually wants her to do some time in the Department of Corrections. All things are on the table, but I think from what I'm hearing from just with listening in on this case, seeing how the judge ruled, looking at the proffer agreement, I see this being a situation where some charges are dismissed and she gets a lesser penalty than one would expect for a murder case.
When you look at cases where this statute is typically used, I know that this is a unique situation. I mean, how likely is it for the people who are not those who fired the shots, where if they, go down the path where they're at trial, or even if they take a deal, like the likelihood that someone could walk away from this and not spend time in prison?
I think if you're charged simply with murder and you did not pull the trigger, you could possibly get a not guilty, because jurors will got to hear the facts of the case. And one thing that's going to stick in their brains are going to be, this person was the actual shooter. That's one thing. They didn't pull the trigger. And proving to a jury that the accessories before the fact knew exactly what he was going to do, and their knowledge and assistance is the same as being the trigger man, is a stretch. So I think the jury in Florence County could acquit some, so there's a chance that he could walk away. The stronger tool that the prosecution has is that if you're convicted for a murder, you're going to jail for a long time. Why roll the dice at their young age? Possibly cooperate with the government and see if you can get a plea deal for something less, get some probation, and hopefully move on the rest of your life in a productive way, where this could be a lesson versus being something that sticks with them as a detriment for their entire lives.
And then just going back to the request that Kistenmacher's attorney put in to allow her to get back on social media to some extent. And, you know, again, I could see people from the outside that might look at that and be like, that's a pretty aggressive request considering what's going on, might not be the best look. When it comes to just generally making a request, when it comes to bond conditions, like, why do you need to almost toe a line and make sure you do things kind of that might not be a bad look, opposed to someone saying, well, the worst the judge could say is no? Like, what's the lasting impact if you say make a request that might be something that people might furl their eyebrows at?
Well, you're going to have the same prosecutors who are involved in all aspects of the case, and you don't want to lose credibility with them as a defense lawyer with certain asks. You need to ask the things that are in good faith. You also want to believe in your arguments that you make. You don't want to just be making a half argument and the defense doesn't believe you believe it, the judge doesn't believe you believe it, and that hurts your credibility going into a trial, which is very important. You want to be credible at all aspects of the case. And as a defendant, as a person, you also don't want to look like you're entitled, that you feel like, you know, why you have to participate in the court system, because that can lead to less favorable plea deals for you later on if the prosecutors and decision makers, you know, have feel some type of a way about you. And importantly, I think with the court here, the defense may have tried to make it seem as if this was a small thing, social media, but I think what the judge recognized is that social media is really the crux of this case. This is really the heart of it. And so a bond condition saying no social media is a big deal here, and it sets precedent that social media use can actually be used to contact witnesses. It can be contact family members. You can do a whole lot of damage, as we see on social media. And so I think it's a tool that other courts and prosecutors, defense lawyers need to be prepared to address in the future, especially with young people now, because an altercation starts at school, goes on social media, and crimes like this could happen later on.
Yeah, and in this case, there's just a lot of interesting things at play. Of course, at the end of the day, you have the loss of a life and so many people impacted. Tyler Bailey, criminal defense attorney, civil rights attorney, thank you as always for being with us on Law and Crime. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and we're also now streaming on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.